term thing. China's influence on the world stage has been growing and America's has been declining. It seems to have accelerated in the last few months.
Trump's tariffs were supposed to make America stronger. Instead, they've exposed just how much leverage the country has already lost, not only in global trade, but in global leadership.
The numbers for the full year should have gone up. But because of tariffs, companies withdrew their guidance and left to their own devices. Wall Street cut numbers for the full year, expecting tariffs were going to take a big bite out of business.
President Donald Trump returned to office promising to finish what he started: break global trade dependencies, revive American manufacturing, and force allies into reciprocal trade deals. His signature weapon? Tariffs. On April 2nd, what he called Liberation Day, the administration announced sweeping tariffs of 10 to 50% on over 100 countries. Canada faced 35%, the EU 30%, China 50%. But instead of forcing trade partners to fold, the strategy is falling flat. According to Morgan Stanley Investment Management, U.S. companies in Q2 2025 showed stronger than expected earnings. Not because tariffs helped, but because Wall Street had slashed expectations too sharply earlier in the year. Companies had withdrawn guidance out of caution, assuming tariffs would bite deep. But those fears didn't fully materialize. What did happen? Supply chains rerouted, costs shifted, and a wave of confusion left investors cautious. Tariffs didn't crash the markets, but they didn't boost domestic production either. Industrial growth remains sluggish. Input prices have edged up. The economic logic behind Trump's strategy is now under serious scrutiny.
I think that's right, Ali. Exactly right. I think if you were to look back at public opinion polling from the first Trump administration, you would also have seen the gap close between the United States and China on the global stage.
Well, China is the world's largest producer of steel, of aluminum. They produce 2/3 of the world's electric vehicles.
While the economic results remain mixed, the geopolitical cost is becoming crystal clear. Longtime allies are walking away, not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. European officials now describe the U.S. as an unreliable partner. Trade talks with the EU have stalled. Japan and South Korea are signing independent energy deals with Canada, bypassing Washington. What's more, Trump's foreign policy choices, cutting USAID funding, slashing international education programs, and walking back diversity initiatives in universities, have eaten into America's soft power. According to Freedom House, the number of democracies worldwide has declined for 19 straight years. Trump didn't start that trend, but analysts say he's accelerating it. U.S. influence used to come not only from the dollar or the Pentagon, but from trust. That trust is eroding, and nothing is replacing it. As Washington raises walls, others are building bridges. China, once hesitant, now responds with full confidence. In April, Beijing imposed retaliatory tariffs as high as 84% on U.S. goods. It restricted rare earth exports, tightened import licenses, and deepened Belt and Road investments. Over $1 trillion has been pledged across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, with little U.S. competition in sight. Even more striking is Canada's response. After being hit with 35% tariffs, Ottawa didn't just retaliate with its own 25% levies. It went further. Prime Minister Mark Carney launched an economic realignment strategy, boosting trade with Mexico and the EU, slashing exposure to U.S. supply chains, and coordinating regional alternatives. Tourism from Canada to the U.S. dropped over 40% in June, according to international booking platforms. Some provinces banned American alcohol from public events, and Canadian consumers, quietly, began choosing differently. Trump's tariff-first doctrine was designed to project power. But in practice, it's revealed a painful truth. Power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from being needed. And in 2025, more nations are showing they can walk away. China is no longer waiting for U.S. permission. Canada is no longer asking for exemptions. Allies are looking elsewhere, and they're finding options. What Trump promised as strength is starting to look like isolation, and the world is moving on, with or without the United States.
that Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions.
When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift. One designed not just to react, but to rebuild.
The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chain. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments.
The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly two-thirds of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100%, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs, with one exception. U.S. steel remains untouched under existing CUSMA terms. This isn't retaliation, it's insulation.
So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
Rather than escalate tensions, Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost U.S. contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements, covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off U.S. steel for now, while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table, without appearing weak. Though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the U.S. free of tariffs under this administration, his approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate, 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals.
Say we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
Canada isn't just responding to a crisis. It's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment. But it offers breathing room and a pathway forward. Whether or not a deal is reached by August 1st, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands.
Yesterday, President Trump criticized the BRICS for promoting anti-U.S. policy and threatened to impose 10% tariff hikes on them.
The BRICS are now emerging as really the only global forum that can stand up to Trump's trade war.
In the middle of an unfinished trade truce with China, President Trump has opened a new front. With his August 1st global tariff deadline approaching, he's now threatening to impose a 10% tariff on any nation that aligns with BRICS, the economic bloc led by China, alongside Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa. It's a broad, blunt move, and while it's meant to box China in, it may be doing the opposite, because instead of lashing out, Beijing is choosing something more subtle and potentially more powerful. Back in June, President Trump declared that a trade deal with China was signed and sealed. But weeks later, no detailed agreement has surfaced. The only thing both sides confirmed was a temporary truce, a 90-day pause on escalating tariffs, set to expire in mid-August. Instead of focusing on finishing that deal, Trump has expanded the fight. On July 7th, he warned that any country linked to BRICS policies, including using non-dollar currencies, building alternative supply chains, or participating in infrastructure cooperation, could face new U.S. tariffs. This message directly impacts countries like India, Indonesia, and Brazil, nations that aren't anti-American but are part of BRICS Plus. It's a sweeping threat that risks alienating both rivals and strategic trade partners. And once again, Trump is using tariffs not just as economic leverage, but as a way to force countries to pick a side.
And threatened to impose 10% tariff hikes on them. What's your comment? BRICS is an important platform for cooperation among emerging markets and developing countries. Cooperation. It is not a bloc for confrontation, nor does it target any country. On the U.S. tariff hikes, China has made its position clear more than once. Trade war and tariff war have no winners, and protectionism leads nowhere.
China has not responded with counter tariffs. Instead, its foreign ministry chose careful, deliberate messaging. Beijing emphasized that BRICS is an open, cooperative platform, not a political alliance aimed at anyone. It said tariff wars have no winners, and that using trade as a weapon would backfire on everyone. At the same time, China is strengthening its position through diplomacy and long-term investment. Over the past month, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held high-level meetings in France and Germany. The focus? Green energy, multilateral cooperation, and strengthening trade outside the dollar system. Projects like the Dabai nuclear plant, solar installations in Greece, and joint energy infrastructure in Germany are part of a wider push. It's Beijing's quiet answer to tariff pressure: create more partners, not more enemies. Meanwhile, within BRICS, China is expanding local currency trade, but doing so without direct confrontation. Countries like India have clarified they're not abandoning the dollar, even as they conduct more rupee-yuan transactions. It's a strategic shift. Rather than escalate, China is reframing BRICS as a development-first bloc, winning sympathy from the global south, while Trump's threats grow broader and harder to enforce.
Makes sense. So it's very hard to make sense of Trump for companies. Companies cannot invest if they feel there is deep uncertainty about the future economic environment. And what Trump is doing is creating a lot of uncertainty, not only for companies, but also for countries.
Trump's tariff warning may look strong, but there are three big risks. First, it's vague. BRICS aligned isn't defined in law. It's unclear what level of cooperation triggers tariffs. And that uncertainty spooks markets. Second, it alienates neutral partners. India and Brazil both want trade with the US, China, and the EU. Threatening them for participating in multilateral groups pushes them closer to Beijing, not further away. Third, and most importantly, it gives China a messaging advantage. By staying calm, presenting itself as a responsible economic power and avoiding retaliation, Beijing now looks like the adult in the room, especially to European and developing nations. And all this is happening while the US-China truce remains unresolved. If no final agreement is reached by mid-August, a new wave of tariffs could crash into already fragile supply chains. This isn't just another trade dispute, it's a deeper confrontation between two worldviews. Trump believes power comes from pressure, tariffs, deadlines, and demands. China, by contrast, is betting on patience, diplomacy, and building alliances one project at a time. But there's a risk in Trump's approach. In trying to isolate China, he may be isolating America. And by turning tariffs into a global loyalty test, he's forcing countries to rethink who they can trust. As the clock ticks toward August 1st, the question isn't whether China will retaliate. It's whether it even needs to.